In 2019, 26 million households watched Martin Scorsese's The Irishman on Netflix. Joe Pesci played a quiet old man who ran a curtain factory in Pennsylvania. He spoke softly, he moved slowly, he seemed like a side character, a regional figure orbiting bigger names like Hoffa and the Five Families. Most viewers had never heard the name Russell Bufalino. And that is exactly how Bufalino wanted it. Because the real Russell Bufalino was not a side character. He was arguably the most powerful mob figure in America for 3 decades. He controlled the Teamsters. He controlled the garment industry. He had a direct line to every major boss from New York to New Orleans to Tampa. The FBI spent 30 years building a file on him, 1,164 pages, and still could not touch him. When Jimmy Hoffa disappeared on July 30th, 1975, every investigator in the country looked at the same man, the quiet one, the one nobody knew. This is the story the movie did not tell you. He was born Rosario Alfredo Bufalino on October 29th, 1903, in Montedoro, a small hill town in the province of Caltanissetta, Sicily. His father, Angelo, was a coal miner, a man who dug rock for pennies and dreamed of something better across the Atlantic. Angelo emigrated to Pittston, Pennsylvania, in July of 1903. The family followed that December, but America did not deliver what it promised. Angelo died in a mining accident around 1904, leaving his wife Christina alone with young children in a country she barely knew. She took the kids back to Sicily. They returned to America in 1906. Then Christina died around 1910. Russell was sent back to Sicily again. By the time he finally settled in the United States in February 1914, he had crossed the Atlantic 3 times. He was 10 years old. He had lost both parents, and he had already learned the first lesson of his life. Nobody was coming to save him. He ended up with an older brother in Buffalo, New York, attended school on the city's Italian West Side, and found work as an auto mechanic. But the streets taught faster than the classroom. And in Buffalo's immigrant enclave, the streets had a curriculum of their own. The man who shaped that curriculum was John C. Montana, a fellow Montedoro Sicilian who served as underboss to Buffalo boss Stefano Magaddino. Montana saw something in the young Bufalino: discipline, patience, the ability to listen more than he talked. When Prohibition arrived in 1919, teenage Russell was already bootlegging. His early criminal record reads like a starter kit: petty larceny, receiving stolen goods, drug dealing, fencing stolen jewelry. Nothing flashy, nothing reckless, just a young man learning the trade. But the move that changed everything wasn't a crime, it was a marriage. On August 9, 1928, Bufalino married Carolyn Ciandra, who was known as Carrie, in Buffalo. The Ciandras were deeply embedded in northeastern Pennsylvania's Mafia. Carrie's uncle, Giovanni John Ciandra, was boss of what would become the Bufalino crime family. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a merger, a bloodline connection to an entire organization. The couple moved to Endicott, New York, where Bufalino partnered with fellow Sicilian bootlegger Joseph Barbara. Then they relocated to Kingston, Pennsylvania, to 304 East Dorrance Street, an unassuming brick house on a quiet street. They would live there for nearly 40 years. And from that house, Bufalino would eventually control an empire that stretched from the coal fields of Pennsylvania to the casino floors of Las Vegas. Northeastern Pennsylvania in the 1930s and the 40s was coal country, union labor. Garment factories, immigrant communities where everyone knew everyone and nobody talked to outsiders. The Pittston crime family operated in this landscape like a shadow. Only 30 to 40 made members at its peak, tiny compared to the Genovese or Gambino families. But size was never the point. Geography was the advantage. Far from media scrutiny and close enough to New York to do business. When Joseph Barbara became boss around 1940, he named Bufalino underboss. Bufalino built legitimate cover through Penn Drape and Curtain Company and at least 7 dress factories around Pittston. He and Carrie never had children. The organization was the family. And from that position as underboss of a small Pennsylvania crime family, Russell Bufalino began building something no one saw coming. Not an army, not a territory, a web. A network of relationships, favors, and access that would make him the most connected man in the American Mafia. After John Ciandra's death in 1949, Bufalino became the de facto leader. Barbara was still technically boss, but aging and in poor health. Bufalino did not waste the opportunity. He consolidated control of the garment industry with a grip so tight that, according to the Times leader, anyone who wanted a dress contract in New York City had to go through Bufalino. Think about that. Not through one of the 5 families, but through a man in a curtain factory in Kingston, Pennsylvania. He colluded with New York's bosses on garment center trucking, loan sharking to manufacturers, and extortion, but it was Bufalino who held the keys. Then came the Teamsters. Bufalino placed his cousin William as general counsel to the union, where William served for 20 years and represented Jimmy Hoffa through 7 court cases. Through that arrangement, Bufalino gained access to the Central States Pension Fund, a $1 billion pool of workers' retirement money. Mob-connected figures drew loans from it to build Las Vegas casinos, fund construction projects, and bankroll operations nationwide. Recipients included Carlos Marcello in New Orleans, Santo Trafficante in Tampa, and Morris Deletes in Vegas. The money flowed, and Bufalino controlled the valve. But he wasn't done. He became a silent partner in Medico Industries, a defense contractor that, with help from corrupt Congressman Dan Flood, became the largest supplier of ammunition to the United States government. $3.9 million in Defense Department contracts, including Vietnam War warheads. A mob boss profiting from a war from a curtain factory in Pennsylvania. FBI surveillance during this period noted something remarkable. When Bufalino met with Philadelphia boss Angelo Bruno, it was Bruno who was always deferential to Bufalino, not the other way around. He maintained close ties with Carlo Gambino, Vito Genovese, Santos Trafficante Jr., and Tony Provenzano. His family was not even a formal member of the Mafia Commission. The Colombo family represented them. But Bufalino's advisory influence sometimes exceeded that of the voting members. His power model was unlike anything the Mafia had seen. Not territory, not muscle, access. And access, it turned out, was worth more than both. November 14th, 1957. Apalachin, New York. A 53-acre estate owned by Joseph Barbara nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. Black Cadillacs and Lincolns with out-of-state plates wind up the long driveway. Inside, approximately 100 men gather, the most powerful criminal figures in the United States, some from Italy, some from Cuba. Vito Genovese called the meeting. He had just orchestrated the assassination of Albert Anastasia and wanted the commission to formally recognize his takeover of the Luciano family. But the man who organized the logistics, the man who chose the location, coordinated the guest list, and arranged the agenda, was Russell Bufalino. The topics went far beyond Genovese's power grab. Cuban gambling interests, international narcotics policy, garment industry rackets, the division of Anastasia's operations. This was a board meeting for the largest criminal enterprise in the Western Hemisphere, and Bufalino was running it from his partner's backyard. But a state trooper named Edgar D. Croswell had been watching Barbara's estate since a suspicious encounter with Carmine Galante the year before. When the luxury cars started arriving, Croswell set up a roadblock. What followed was chaos. 58 men were detained. Dozens more fled through the woods in their expensive suits, scrambling through brush and mud. Bufalino was stopped in a 1957 Chrysler Imperial. His passengers were Vito Genovese, Gerardo Catina, Joseph Ida, and Dominic Oliveto. His excuse was that he was visiting his sick friend Barbara. Nobody believed him. All the apprehended attendees were convicted of conspiracy. All the convictions were overturned on appeal in 1960. But the real damage could not be reversed. J. Edgar Hoover could no longer deny that the Mafia existed. The FBI's organized crime focus intensified overnight. Membership books were slammed shut. They would not reopen until 1970. Barbara lost his liquor license, lost his bottling contracts, and died of a heart attack in June 1959. The meeting Bufalino organized to help Genovese ended up exposing the entire organization to the world. It led directly to the McClellan Committee hearings, Bobby Kennedy's anti-mob crusade, and eventually the RICO Act of 1970. And the irony? Bufalino survived. He always survived. After Barbara's death, the commission formally recognized him as boss. The man who had organized the disaster walked away with a promotion. By the early 1960s, the Smithsonian magazine would describe him as the country's most important mafia figure not based in a major city. And he operated from the same modest brick house in Kingston, Pennsylvania. No flash, no headlines, no entourage. While John Gotti would later court cameras and tabloid covers, Bufalino cultivated something far more valuable: invisibility. He loved prosciutto bread, red wine, and boxing. A former police chief who knew him recalled that he was old school, a perfect gentleman. You would not know he had 2 dimes to rub together. But behind that quiet exterior was a man whose permission was required for decisions that shaped the entire American underworld. Frank Sheeran put it plainly. You wanted to bribe a judge, you asked Russell. You wanted to make somebody disappear, you had to get Russell's permission. Every week, Bufalino made trips to New York. The FBI bugged his hotel rooms. They captured virtually nothing useful. His discipline was legendary: no careless talk, no careless chatter, no phone calls that mattered. He kept a plaque that read, "There is no conspiracy when only one remains." Meanwhile, the operation kept expanding. Gambling across Pennsylvania and upstate New York. An extensive loan sharking network. Fencing operations for stolen goods, vending machine rackets, and connections that reached into places the public would never have believed. He allegedly had involvement in the production of The Godfather, reportedly securing final script approval and getting his godson Al Martino cast as Johnny Fontaine. His ties to Santos Traficante Jr. placed him in the orbit of CIA and Mafia plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. The Pennsylvania Crime Commission's 1989 report confirmed the family's involvement in illegal gambling, loan sharking, narcotics trafficking, and labor racketeering. For nearly 2 decades, Russell Bufalino sat at the center of American organized crime, and almost nobody outside of law enforcement knew his name. But there was one relationship that would define his legacy more than any other: Jimmy Hoffa. The alliance between Bufalino and Hoffa was built on a simple exchange. Through cousin William, Bufalino helped Hoffa consolidate power over the Teamsters. In return, the mob gained access to pension fund loans worth hundreds of millions. Bufalino introduced his protege Frank Sheeran to Hoffa, and Hoffa reportedly created a Delaware Teamsters local and installed Sheeran as its leader. It worked perfectly until Bobby Kennedy got involved. Kennedy's Justice Department prosecuted Hoffa relentlessly. In 1964, Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering. He installed Frank Fitzsimmons as a compliant replacement, a man who was supposed to keep the seat warm. But Fitzsimmons turned out to be even more useful to the mob than Hoffa had been. He didn't ask questions, he didn't make demands, he just signed the paperwork. When Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence in late 1971, it came with a restriction: no union involvement until 1980. Hoffa agreed to the terms and immediately began campaigning to reclaim the presidency anyway. This terrified the mob leadership. Not because Hoffa was powerful, because Hoffa was desperate. And desperate men talk. He threatened to expose mafia corruption of the Teamsters. He was making noise, loud and public. On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa vanished from the parking lot of the Matches Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. He was never seen again. The FBI's official Hoffex memo listed Russell Bufalino as a potential suspect and one of the original planners. FBI informant Ralph Picardo, Tony Provenzano's driver, claimed Bufalino ordered the hit. FBI surveillance placed Sheeran driving Bufalino in Detroit immediately after the disappearance, and William Bufalino's daughter's wedding in Detroit on August 1st, 2 days after Hoffa vanished, provided perfect cover for both men to be in the city. Years later, Frank Sheeran would claim he shot Hoffa twice in the back of the head in a house on Beaverland Street, on Bufalino's orders. That claim became the basis for the movie The Irishman, but it remains deeply contested. Blood found in the alleged murder house did not match Hoffa's DNA. FBI lead agent Andrew Sluss called Sheeran's confession laughable. Author Dan Moldia dismissed it entirely, calling it a one-source story about a pathological liar. What is broadly accepted among historians is that Bufalino played a central organizational role in whatever happened to Hoffa. The body has never been found. The case remains officially open. And Russell Bufalino never said a word about it. For 3 decades, the FBI had built a file 1,164 pages long and had nothing to show for it. Bufalino had beaten stolen television charges, beaten cigarette vending extortion. The INS spent 14 years trying to deport him, and Italy refused to take him back. He was, by every measure, untouchable. But in 1976, a desperate man walked into a jewelry store using Bufalino's name, and that desperate man agreed to wear a wire. His name was Jack Napoli. He owed $25,000 to a New York jeweler and had used Bufalino's name to secure diamonds on credit. When payment came due, Napoli could not cover it. Bufalino summoned him, and in April of 1976, Napoli showed up to that meeting with a recording device hidden on his body. What the FBI heard on that tape was something they had waited 30 years to capture: Russell Bufalino's own voice, threatening to kill a man. For a boss who had spent his entire career saying nothing incriminating, he was caught on tape threatening murder over a jeweler's debt. The FBI finally had admissible evidence from his own mouth. On August 8, 1978, Bufalino was convicted of extortion and sentenced to 4 years at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. He was 74 years old, a first-time prison inmate. 3 decades of perfect silence, undone by a $25,000 jewelry bill. He was released on parole on May 8, 1981. Then Russell Bufalino made the mistake that would end everything. He tried to have Jack Napoli killed. Through Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano and a fellow inmate named Stephen Fox, Bufalino arranged a hit on the witness who had put him away. The plan unraveled. On October 23, 1981, a federal jury convicted him of conspiring to murder a witness and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 10 years at the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. He was 78 years old. His health collapsed behind bars. In 1987, he suffered a stroke and was transferred to the Federal Medical Facility in Springfield, Missouri. He was released on May 5, 1989, at approximately 85 years old, and he returned to Kingston in a wheelchair. A Times leader journalist who saw him described a man sitting under a gray blanket, staring and unmoving. His wife Carrie whispered that he was depressed. He spent his final years in a Kingston nursing home. A nurse reported 6 months before his death, he can't communicate at all. Russell Bufalino died at 2:10 p.m. on February 25, 1994, at Nesbitt Memorial Hospital in Kingston. Natural causes, myocardial infarction. He was 90 years old. His relatives kept the funeral plans secret because they did not want investigators documenting who showed up. He was buried at Denison Cemetery in Swoyersville, Pennsylvania. His wife Carrie survived him by 12 years, dying on December 30th, 2006 at 95. His downfall was not a dramatic raid. It was not a gaudy-style betrayal by an underboss wearing a wire for years. It was a petty jeweler's debt and a man who talked too much. After 30 years of legendary silence, the most disciplined boss the FBI had ever tracked, Russell Bufalino was brought down by his own recorded voice. The man who kept a plaque reading, "There is no conspiracy when only one remains," forgot the second half of that lesson. there is always someone else who remains, and sometimes that someone is wearing a wire. The FBI could not build a RICO case against him. They could not turn his men. They could not crack his inner circle. But they did not need to. Bufalino gave them the evidence himself, not through some grand miscalculation, but through anger, the simplest, most human weakness there is. Do you think Bufalino would still be unknown today if The Irishman had never been made? Let me know in the comments. Russell Bufalino was gone. But the family he had built from a curtain factory in coal country did not die with him, not right away. It took another decade for the last pieces to fall, and when they did, they fell in a way Russell Bufalino never would have allowed. William Big Billy D'Elia took over. He had started as Bufalino's driver in the late 1960s, a kid from the neighborhood who ran errands and kept his mouth shut. Over the years, Bufalino treated him like a son. D'Elia later described Russell as like a father to me. For a while, D'Elia held things together. He maintained operations and waste management and the traditional rackets. He kept relationships alive with families in New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Florida. But the world Russell Bufalino had operated in was disappearing. The coal industry was dying. The garment factories were closing or moving overseas. RICO prosecutions were thinning the ranks of every family in the country. The witness protection program was pulling informants out and giving them new lives in exchange for testimony. The foundation was cracking. In 2006, D'Elia was indicted for laundering $600,000 in drug proceeds. He pleaded guilty to witness tampering and money laundering and was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. Then he did something that would have been unthinkable under Russell Bufalino. He cooperated. D'Elia testified against casino developer Louis de Naples, a man with deep ties to the old organization, a Bufalino man talking to the government. Former Pennsylvania Crime Commission investigator James Canavy said it plainly in 2011, "I don't think there's a standalone family here anymore. Any remnants here would be aligned with the New York families." The Bufalino crime family, the organization Russell had led for nearly 4 decades, was effectively defunct. But then something unexpected happened. A movie brought him back. Joe Pesci came out of retirement to play Russell Bufalino in The Irishman. He reportedly turned Scorsese down approximately 50 times before finally agreeing. Scorsese told him this character would be the opposite of what you normally see, and Pesci delivered. Critics called it a masterclass in restraint. Matt Zoller Seitz wrote that Pesci was as quiet and controlled as his Goodfellas and Casino characters were obnoxious and volatile. Pesci earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, one of the film's 10 Oscar nominations. Overnight, millions of people heard the name Russell Bufalino for the first time. D'Elia told author Matt Birkbeck that he hated the film and said it was fiction. That frustration partly motivated Birkbeck's 2023 book, The Life We Chose, based on extensive interviews with D'Elia, an attempt to set the record straight about who Russell really was and what he really controlled. Kirkus Reviews went further than the film, calling Bufalino arguably the most powerful and important organized crime figure of the 20th century. Another book is coming. Charles Bufalino, Russell's cousin, has a memoir titled Bufalino, scheduled for April 2026 through Penguin Random House, promising the most authentic and probable solution to the Hoffa mystery. A documentary called It Is What It Is, the true story of the Bufalino family, is also in development. 30 years after his death, people are still trying to understand who Russell Bufalino really was, and maybe that is the point. What Bufalino reveals about power is not what Hollywood taught us. The most dangerous man in the room was not the loudest. He was not the one with the biggest crew or the flashiest lifestyle. He was the one nobody noticed. A family of 30 to 40 made members from coal country-controlled organizations more than 10 times its size, not through violence, but through relationships, access, and patience. The Mafia that Hollywood sells is drama, shootouts, betrayals, courtroom theatrics. The real Mafia, at its most effective, looked like Russell Bufalino. Quiet, modest, invisible. His model, access over territory, silence over spectacle, turned out to be far more durable than brute force. It took the FBI 30 years and over 1,000 pages to even get close. The Hoffa mystery remains officially open. The body has never been found. And the film that made Bufalino famous is built on a confession that most experts call fabricated. Meanwhile, the real story, the garment monopoly, the defense contracts, the CIA connections, the Teamsters billions, is more extraordinary than anything Scorsese put on screen. The truth did not need Hollywood. Hollywood needed the truth. It just did not use enough of it. New books are being written. Declassified files are being opened. People who stayed silent for decades are starting to talk. The Quiet Dawn secrets are still surfacing 30 years after his death. Denison Cemetery, Swoyersville, Pennsylvania. A modest headstone. No indication of who is buried there. Nothing to suggest that this plot holds the remains of the man the FBI called one of the most ruthless and powerful leaders of the Mafia in the United States. Carrie is buried beside him. 304 East Dorrance Street still stands in Kingston, just a house on a quiet street. No plaque, no marker, no tour buses, the most powerful mob boss most people never heard of. Invisible even in death. But in April 2026, Charles Bufalino's memoir promises to finally deliver what investigators, journalists, and historians have chased for half a century: the inside story from the family itself. After 50 years of silence on the Hoffa case, a Bufalino is ready to talk. And somewhere in the coal country of northeastern Pennsylvania, the question that Russell Bufalino spent his entire life making sure nobody could answer is still hanging in the air. Not who he was, but how much more there is that we still do not know.